Okay, hello everyone. Hello and welcome to this session on sustainable food processing. My name is Natasha Foote. I am a freelance agri-food journalist. I have the pleasure of guiding the discussion throughout this session. So, as we navigate the challenges of our food system, it's crucial to focus not only on the agriculture side and the consumer side, but also something that falls in between, and we're talking here, of course, about food processing. So in this session, we're going to explore the role of innovations in food processing in achieving sustainable, healthy, safe, and affordable foods at the scale needed to meet the demands of the population. So we're going to hear diverse approaches of different EU research projects into processing level innovation with a series of presentations from our panelists, followed by a panel discussion. So to kick us off with the first of our presentations, I'd like to welcome to the floor Professor Imke Sampers, who is Associate Professor at Ghent University, and Imke specialises in the field of vegetable processing and also water treatment. So Imke, I pass you the floor.
Thank you. So indeed, I want to present to you some aspects, and I will do that with two cases, two European projects. It's better? Okay. So, and this is concerning the processing of vegetables and potatoes, and this on a sustainable way. So the first project that I want to introduce to you is the Fair Chain project. It's a European project where we actually are going into depth in some innovations that can be used in our sector. And it's primarily used, the innovations or the technologies, to actually test them, but also to pilot them and to demonstrate them in order to support the farmers and food processors to be able to upscale their processes, but also to have a kind of an expansion, especially when we are thinking about regional production. So first and for all, maybe some background is that we are looking into the agri-food systems, and specifically the dominant ones are based on long supply chains. And as you can see, so we have the mass production. We are able to produce them at lower prices. The economies are on large scale, and we have enough resource efficiencies. But they are globalized. They have a concentration of benefits in the way of profit, and we have high-tech processing. This can give you economic as well as social and environmental issues. So what we wanted to focus on is more onto the short food value chains, where we have a limited number of intermediaries who are actually going from the raw product up to the end product, going to the consumer. With this, we want to have a greater social cohesion. We want specifically have a fairer price of farmers and to be able to have some kind of processing at their level. And of course, we also want to create jobs at the regional level as well. But sometimes, especially when we are thinking about fruits and vegetables, they are seasonal products. And sometimes we only have a time, a specific period in time that we have a kind of processing, which of course has some impact on that. Also, when we want to produce something, we will have higher prices and only limited distribution. So we want to also enlarge that distribution effect. So there is somewhat a mismatch between the demand of the citizen to have a kind of tasty, of course, in the first place, food, but also something which is affordable and which is nutritious and produced by the region themselves. And this, of course, in a fair and sustainable supply chain. Next to that aspect, I only picked one of the things that we have focused on, is the way that we also have non-markable vegetables and fruits, which causes, of course, a lot of waste, and this is because they are not bought by the consumer. We have a kind of consumer perception of how a tomato should look like, how a cucumber should look like. So from the moment there is some discoloration or mismatching in forms or whatever, they will not be bought by the consumers. Although we already do something on the level of retail, they are still quite nice to be used in the food processing industry. Because there are some benefits by valorizing this type of products, and by doing that, we will have a kind of reduction in waste, and we will have a more efficient use of our resources. Specifically because these non-markable vegetables and fruits have still a very high nutritional value. So it's really important that we can somewhat use them, of course, and this will also benefit for a broader population. Also, by valorizing these type of products, we will create some more economic value and social opportunities when we have the valorization and the processing thereof. So within that European project, we have some kind of approach where we have used a co-creation, and that co-creation workshop was taken along during the full period of the project itself, where we explore to have new market opportunities, specifically on farmer levels and at short value chains, to increase, of course, the revenue for those type of producers, so mid-scale to small-scaled producers, and specifically also farmers. For that, you need to have a very collaborative approach, which means we are looking for partnerships. Yeah, not only partnerships within the food industry, but also the ones that are actually building the equipment so that they can actually make also equipment fit for purpose for a farmer, so small-scaled, affordable, not too complex, maybe easy to share, so that we can have different business models. As I already explained, we have equipment that will be used maybe just a month, a few weeks, maybe a little bit longer because of the seasonal effect of some kind of products, or maybe because we are only producing very small scaled byproducts. Like think, for example, if it's not within the vegetable and fruit products, maybe like the byproduct of whey, it can also be valorized by maybe adding some kind of vegetables, herbs for tasting. Also there, those byproducts could be valorized, but there are only in limited volumes sometimes available. So that's something that we have to give a look at. And of course, if you have to buy as a farmer equipment, it costs you a lot of money to invest. And of course, you need to have a kind of return of investment. And also you need to have some kind of knowledge on how to use these aspects. And that is something that we wanted to tackle within the Fair Chain project. So we have different cases. I will only tackle one, which is the Belgian case study, where we were thinking of one process step to have the valorization, and that was around the packaging, because a lot of packaging, especially at farmer level, is still done manually, and sometimes they're building their own equipment to be affordable, but it is not always fit for a purpose of guarantees you of a food safe and hygienic concept. So for us, it was really important to have some equipment which is available, affordable for those, that they have access to it, maybe by having it mobile, so that it can be shared, or that it is stayed locally at one company and that different companies can make use of it, or to have it in a kind of a cooperative way, so that also business operators and farmers have access to certain equipment for a time period. So that was very important to look up to upscaling for those type of producers. But of course, if you are building such an equipment, it may also be of interest for big producers, because they can actually also have kind of downscaling and make sometimes more availability of their equipment for others to be used, or for having a kind of valorization of byproducts, which will also be in those big producers that will be present. So that was really important for us. So as I said, we focused in this case study on a filling machine, as you can see here. So we have a filling machine where pouches can be filled. And why have we chosen for pouches? Because as you can see, you can have them in different formats, you can have them in different volumes, and they can all be processed at one machine. So you don't need for each type of volume or each type of format a new machine. So it has to be a machine which is quite flexible and can be used by multiple actors. That was for us very important. Of course, because we want to share the machine, you also have to think about the hygienic design of that machine, because we want to have kind of food safety. If you are thinking about allergies that can be spread or microorganisms, it's really important that the machine is not too complex and also easy to clean. So keep it simple as it is. On the other hand, we also wanted to see what is the environmental impact on water use and energy use, because we wanted to shift from the conventional process where we have our raw material sterilized or pasteurized. We have our packaging material, and we bring them together. And then afterwards, we will have, again, a kind of a thermal or non-thermal food processing step to have a complete sterility of the product. Then afterwards, you need to have a kind of a cooling step, especially if you have a thermal processing. And all of that takes you a lot of energy, but also water use, because most of the times the cooling step is done by water. So if we can eliminate those steps, we will maybe have an impact also on energy and water use. And for us, that was really important. And of course, if you want to do it in another way, we wanted to have an aseptic environment, not around the machine, because a farmer, mostly the equipment will be installed somewhere outside or in a hall somewhere, so not really in a clean room as what you could expect when you have a food processor. So that was important to have the aseptic environment within the machine built, so that we can guarantee the hygienic aspects and food safety of that product. And of course, we wanted to make a small machine because we want to process little volumes because of the time periods, and we want to make it mobile so that the machine was able to be shared. So this is a little bit the focus on that machinery and the validation thereof. Of course, if you are thinking about pouches, you could say, why have you chosen to use plastics instead of something else? You need to know at this moment, glass bottles are sometimes used by the farmers. They are buying them sterile, but they have to buy big volumes. So they also need a big storage room to put all those bottles in place, and that also costs a lot of money. That's also the reason why we have chosen to use the pouches. On the other hand, it's also important to know that when we have the pouches, we have compared, for example, for a farmer who is making a kind of an apple compote, so like an apple mousse, we wanted to see what is the impact on the environment if we would use glass bottles compared to the pouches. And we actually saw that the environmental impact of the glass bottles was actually bigger than the ones with the pouches, what for us was very important. But on the other hand, if you are thinking in the way of a big processor, then you will see that the footprint of the food was larger than the packaging itself. So it depends on how you are looking into that details. But the main important thing, if you are thinking about packaging, is because we want to have a kind of a shelf life. You want to valorize it, you want to sell it, and you want to keep it for a longer time period at your place, but also at the consumer level. And then you have to look to the food product itself. So there are already some requirements and choices that have to be made based on the food itself. And then you have to think also, on the other hand, if you have the right packaging material, nowadays, especially with the new rules and guidelines on plastics, we see that we need to have something which is recyclable and sustainable. And I think we have put the right choice, so we have the best option taken in function of recyclability and sustainability, because it meets the requirements in function of functionality, making it that we have enough oxygen barrier and water vapor barrier. But on the other hand, we also have looked into details on the current design for cycling guidelines, and also the ones are upcoming around packaging and packaging waste regulations. So we see that they are also meeting those aspects. But we also looked further, because we only not look into the fact that we want to have something which is recyclable. We also wanted to see if there is something available for the farmers which is bio-based, but again in the perspective of having a functional packaging material which needs to fulfill some requirements. At the moment, there are no biodegradable films that are available on the market. We have some aspects which is in the level of research and development, but not yet on the market. But we will follow that up within the project and also afterwards to see. But at the moment, we are thinking about something which is recyclable and sustainable. And as you can see here in the picture at the right, you can also see that, for example, we have different layers. So you have your pouch, and on top we have something welded on it, where we put actually all the information needed for the consumer on it. And it's easily removable, so when we are recycling the plastics, we can easily remove the different parts of the pouches and make it more recyclable than it is. So there are also some point of attentions over there. So that was the first case study. So we are looking into food processing in a way to help valorize some products for the farmers and to have them also available in the regions. A second project is also a European project where we work together in a collaboration with France. And that was more on the fact that we are looking into water usage in the sector of vegetables and potato processing. And as you can see, the food industry as a whole is already a big consumer when we are thinking about water. And the problem is that we are using it for, well, it's not a problem, but it's of use, of course, to have it used in different types of processing steps like washing, cooking, etc. And we also want to have fresh, potable water. That's preferable. But as you know, water is becoming scarce, so we have to look for alternatives. And we have them, those alternatives, but we also have to look into the fact that we want to have food which is food safe to be consumed. So we also have to think in fact of water quality, and we want to see if those different sources can meet those requirements. And for that, of course, you need to have some water treatment. But we want to go a step further, and actually we are already also treating our water in a water treatment facility. And because of doing that, we are actually doing it because we want to make sure that the water that is in discharge also is meeting some guidelines to don't have any dangers towards the biodiversity, and that we don't have an environmental impact by having toxins going from the processing plant towards the environment. So if we are already doing all that water treatment technologies to purify that process and wastewater, why not think about reusing that water back into our processing facilities and to invest in that? So there are different options. You have your processing plant where we have our wastewater treated in a conventional way, and then it's appropriate to have it discharged as effluent, or maybe we have further processing to be able to reuse that water again in our processing facility. But on the other hand, we can maybe also have water treatments in place next to a processing equipment to directly reuse that water in our system. Of course, if you are thinking in a way of reusing, you have to think about, is it microbial safe? And also, what about physicochemical properties? Especially if you think about vegetables and potatoes, we are using crop protection agents. They will accumulate at a certain moment in the water. So also there we have to look if they can have impacts when we are using that water or if we are discharging them. So that's also quite important. And of course, if you are treating them, we have to think about the ecotoxicological perspective, because if you are making new metabolites, we have to think in a way that is it safe enough for discharge, is it safe enough to be reused towards the consumer? And of course, it always have to be in a cost-effective way. So the first that I want to show as an example of a technological-driven solution for that is actually going from potato to Belgian fries. And one of those steps is actually blanching. It's like a kind of a cooking step where we want to leach out actually the sugars and the starch, which will mainly be in the water of coming from the blancher. And of course, we are also doing that for the inactivation of the enzymes to keep the potato in a good quality. So why not putting some treatment next to the blancher so that we are able to reuse that water in a kind of a loop back into the processing step? Because I already told you, we are heating the water, so we want to actually have a kind of heat recovery so that we can reuse that energy which we already have put into the water. And of course, you will create a new side stream, a byproduct containing sugars and starch. So why not valorize also that step further into the process? And of course, it has to be easy to implement. So on pilot scaled equipment, we have tested that and already implemented those in the companies to evaluate if there is a possibility to have such an equipment put in place. And we have seen that there are quite promising results when we are using evaporation condensation to be able to have potable water. And this is actually, this pilot scaled equipment is actually linked into a Flemish project, which is called Sucro, so that we could be able to valorize those pilot equipment in the right place. And then, of course, we have to think about microbiology and the crop protection agents. So also for that, we have tested some of the technologies like ozone to degrade the crop protection agents or to absorb them by activated carbon. And what we actually saw is, and I can go immediately to the take-home measures maybe, is that we are able to make the water microbial safe, that they will meet the drinking water directive concerning the crop protection agents, that we see that we have also improved the water to be able to discharge it in a safe way for the environment. And we also have a monitoring system in place to actually monitor the technology. But again, what is important is there was a problem on crop protection agents. We found a solution. We have treatment technologies to be able to remove those crop protection agents. But we have also to take a step back, because now we have used the drinking water guideline to see if there's a fulfillment towards the pesticides and that water to be reused. But maybe it's better to first do some fundamental research and to look into a risk assessment to see if it was actually necessary to have this type of solution. So my general conclusion is that if you are doing such type of research on food processing at farmer level or even for big producers, that it will open doors to innovation, sustainability, but also very important for the economic growth in the regions. And with that, we will have a more inclusive and resilient food system. We want to have a call to action to all the stakeholders. It's very important to have everyone, so the research institutes, the policymakers, but also the food industry and the machine builders. So a quite large public and multidisciplinary approach. And of course, this will actually foster also our economic development, give us more food security and environmental stewardship. And with that, I want to finish.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for that overview, insight into these two projects. Fascinating. We'll dip into it a lot more during our panel. But firstly, let me turn to our second speaker today, and that is Professor Luc de Voost, who is a professor at the Vrije University of Brussels, and he's focusing on all things food fermentation processes. So I will pass you the floor for your presentation.
Thank you. So indeed, I'm from the research group Industrial Microbiology and Food Biotechnology, and we focus on fermentation processes, in particular spontaneous food fermentation processes, and try to develop functional starter cultures. I would like to convince you that fermentation is an important processing step, if you can call it a processing step, and that it is and it will be a pillar for a sustainable food chain. So fermentation, 3 different kinds of fermentation you can consider or distinguish. First of all, fermentation processes lay at the basis of the production of fermented foods and beverages since historic times. Since thousands of years, we make wine, beer, bread, and all such kinds of fermented foods. So it's a safe processing of raw materials from animal husbandry as well as from plant origin. Second, and last Monday, this first category this first type of fermentation processes was categorized as what I called traditional fermentation. Second, fermentation processes are applied for decades to produce biomass. Think about baker's yeast. For fine chemicals, think about amino acids, nucleotides, vitamins, pigments, etc., as well as biopolymers, such as exopolysaccharides, which are sugar polymers. So sometimes we hear that these are new processes, but this already exists since a very long time. Last Monday, this was called biomass fermentation, precision fermentation, but also traditional fermentation can be placed in this category. And third, fermentation processes lay, and in the future will lay, at the basis of the production of platform molecules. When the coals and oil will be exhausted, we still need to make all the basic molecules for further processing into plastics, textile, food, of course, etc. So then we have to use not fossil raw materials, but renewable raw materials, and fermentation will be an important role will have an important role in these so-called biorefineries, and of course also to produce biofuels. So classically, fermented foods and beverages can be defined as products that are produced by means of bioprocess technology. And in this technology, microorganisms and their enzymes play a key role, either through spontaneous fermentation or through the addition of functional starter cultures. And we don't realize, but many fermentation processes are still spontaneous fermentation processes. And this fermentation is done to obtain desirable quality characteristics in the end products. It took a long time before we have defined a recent description of fermented foods. It was a discussion of 13 experts from all over the world. We discussed about it 2 years to come finally to the definition foods made through desired microbial growth and enzymatic conversions of food components. So desirable microbial growth, because there is a lot of background microbiota in the raw materials, and enzymatic conversions, because the enzymes are the catalysts of the microbes that do the work. And why do we produce fermented foods and beverages in such a long time, and why will we do that in the future even more? Because first of all, it's a cheap way of prolongation of the shelf life of raw materials. Not only cheap, but also in a natural and sustainable way. Because we just modify pH, water activity, redox potential, etc. And we do that through an acidification, an alcoholization process, whether or not with salt addition, and thereby inhibiting the background, the spoilage, and the pathogenic microorganisms. So it contributes to food safety. And that was historically very important to prolong the shelf life of raw materials. And this is still the case in many countries, many regions. Today, we also do the production of fermented foods and beverages in order to improve their organoleptic properties, their texture, their mouthfeel, their flavor, their color. So we contribute to the quality of these food products, and actually, without knowing, we try to give it a clean label status. Thirdly, it enhances digestibility. So think about, as examples, dairy products like yogurt, where the lactose is fermented into lactic acid, cereals, where anti-nutritional factors have been removed, toxic compounds have been removed, like linamarin in cassave, mineral bioavailability, because minerals are often complexed in phytate, for instance, and fermentation can elaborate these minerals, etc. But also vitamin production, which is very important in, for instance, fermented meat products and other fermented cereals, etc. So it contributes to food safety, to food quality, but also to the health of the consumer. And finally, it's very important to improve technological properties, because thanks to fermentation, you get changed functionalities, reduced bulk volumes, less waste, and certainly when these fermentation processes are very well controlled. And this includes valorization of side streams. I don't call it waste streams, because most of the waste streams are becoming valorized, so we call it side streams, which can be used for fermentation as well to create new products. Once you understand these processes, you can use starter cultures to have more controllable, more safe, more fast processes. So fermentation, making use of such starter cultures, is a natural and sustainable manufacturing process. In my group, we focus on artisan-type fermented foods, like cocoa fermentation, a very important raw material for chocolate production. And we try to understand these fermentation processes and then incorporate the characteristics of these processes in modern, in present-day production processes. So we call it foods, whether or not fermented, with artisan characteristics. And secondly, to contribute to the clean label food production. So no use of chemical additives such as preservatives, texturizers, colorants, but by in situ production by these starter cultures of these compounds that have similar functions. And secondly, why do we study these processes? Because they are actually a treasure chest of new species and strains. So we discover many new microbial strains, many new microbial species, and all these food-grade microorganisms that we isolate from such naturally fermented foods actually display an enormous potential. An enormous potential that can be used not only to produce such fermented foods and beverages, but also for many other production processes. And that's exactly what we do in a European project, which is called Health Firm, a Horizon Europe project with 23 partners from 11 countries. It's coordinated by the Laboratory of Food Chemistry and Biochemistry of the Leuven University. And the partners are spread all over Europe. And why was that important? Because, as I just said, we look at spontaneous fermented foods and beverages, and we try, or we will isolate many microbes from those. So among these partners, there are actually 4 hubs that collect regional sourdoughs, which are fermented flow water mixtures. Borsch, for instance, in Romania, Bulgaria, which is fermented wheat bran, etc. And the hubs are here in Belgium, Switzerland, Romania, and Finland. And we try to map this diversity all over Europe in order to find new microbes with new properties. Indeed, this Health Firm project aims to enable an evidence-based transition in society and industry from traditional to sustainable, and we focus on plant-based fermentation processes and to provide sustainable diets that also deliver health benefits to the consumers. And this by what we call design. That means these spontaneous fermentation processes we would like to turn into rationally designed fermentation processes. So to better steer them, to control them, to have less misproductions, etc. And we focus on plant-based fermented food products because of the pressure on animal-based products. And there are several focal points. So first of all, the microbial resources. As I told you, we collect it through all over Europe and try to find new microorganisms. We also will design new fermentation technologies because it's not obvious to ferment all these plant-based materials. We hope, of course, that this will have an impact when these fermentation processes are well performed on human health and the gut microbiome. And of course, it will also be, it has to be accepted by the consumer, so consumer behavior is also studied within this project. And concerning the human health and microbiome, of course, it has to contribute to human health, and that's why we also will unravel these food fermentation microbiomes. As I told you, we focus on grain-based foods like sourdough and borscht, and we will also have a look at the impact on the human gut microbiome. So I hope I have introduced you in the historical meaning of fermentation, and that will also be a very important processing technique for the future. So it will be indeed a pillar for a sustainable food chain. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'd now like to pass the floor to our next speaker, which is Professor Tara Groat, who is an associate professor at KU Leuven. And she's going to talk to us a little bit more about understanding food processing and the link with health. So I pass you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. So as our moderator already said, so I want to introduce you a little bit to the relation between processing and nutritional functionality. I will introduce you to the way of thinking, starting from the raw material pulses and legumes. So I think you know beans, you know chickpeas, you know lentils, so we call them pulses. I will start to present you some data that we recently obtained in the context also of an EU-funded project, and it's a project called Food Engine, and it finished in 2023. Just to be brief, so it was run among a consortium of EU partners, and we were the coordinator at the level of KU Leuven. And what we did in this project is we started from plant-based raw materials, and we have studied their quality, functionality as part of the food chain. So as part of processing, as part of storage, and we looked to food quality. When we talk about food quality, sorry, one slide back. When we talk about food quality, we look to techno-functional quality, we look to sensorial quality, but we also look to nutritional functionality, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. I don't know if you're aware, let's say aside from scientific excellence, what we aim for as part of these EU projects, in these Marie Curie training projects, we also aim, let's say, to train young potentials, very mobile persons, and let's say as a result of this network, we also trained 13 early stage researchers which are now working in industry and academia with this way of thinking. But what I want to talk to you is about looking to a food system as a delivery system of energy and nutrients. I think everybody knows when we eat food, it's also partly due to pleasure, but we should also eat food to just stay alive, let's say, to finish the day, to have energy, but also as a delivery system for the building blocks that our body needs in order to be healthy. And if you think about this type of meal, so I'm going to talk about pulses. So think about this internationally known meal, dal, and you have a particular pulse in there. So let's focus on the chickpea. And then you will see that this chickpea is a source of macronutrients, starch, protein, and lipids that can also deliver us energy because we can convert them to energy in our body. But it's also a delivery system of, for example, components which can be functionalized in the body if they're released from the food system. You should also be aware that when we look to a food system from a nutrient point of view, you should not look to it as a bag of loose things that are in there, in which they're just freely available. Now, if you have a food system, you should approach it in that way that it's in fact uniquely structured. It's uniquely structured from the macronutrients point of view, from the micronutrients point of view, and this is a characteristic of the raw material, or it can be a characteristic in the food system on how we produce it through the chain. It's an important way of thinking. So let's say being aware that the food nutrients are structurally organized and that we can play around with that as part of the chain is an important thing to know. And I would like to tell you a story today about, that it's clear for you, let's say before we have a raw material that ends on our plate, it went through a whole journey. And all this journey, starting from the raw material, because let's say we can already decide if we eat a chickpea or if we eat a bean, but if we eat a chickpea, we can opt for different varieties of chickpeas, for example, and we'll have already different endogenous potential of the raw material. But then we go, for example, to the next step, which we can call post-harvest storage. This is relevant in the context of pulses. Pulses typically are dried on the field. Because of that, their microbial is stored stable for a long period. But that doesn't mean that maybe when we store them that there can be some slow biochemical changes occurring that can affect the processing functionality later on. So it can be useful to have an insight into that. Then we'll process it. I hope there is nobody in the room that is just swallowing raw pulse seeds. I can tell you if you will start to do that, then it will almost completely unharmed reach your toilet after a journey through your body. But I can also tell you it's not a good thing to do because you will still have a lot of anti-nutrients and it can also be of a health concern. That's not what we do. We are used to it. Our grandma already did it and they did it for a long time ago. We process this type of food materials as part of the chain. But how do we process it? I think everybody knows you can soak your seeds, you can cook your seeds at home, or you can just buy a can, or you can also buy a food product that is being made from the pulses, for example. So a whole story to tell here at the level of processing, and then of course you can digest it. What I want you to be aware of is that we have here a whole series of variables from farm to fork, but also from farm to flush, even in the body. I will come to that later on in this presentation. A whole series of variables that in fact we can use as a richness in order to design the nutritional functionality. So, I want to introduce you to the fact that this journey of this seed, of this pulse ingredient, can impact the macronutrient digestion kinetic. I understand that maybe it's a little bit a scientific term, but I will explain it to you with this slide. You need to be aware the moment we are eating a food product, not necessarily it can be completely functionalized in our body. So for example, a starch molecule, it's a polymer, and it needs to be cut down in our body into small pieces so that it can be functionalized in our body. This is a complex thing that needs to occur from bigger building blocks to smaller metabolites that can actually be absorbed in our body. And I can also tell you it is important to know how fast this process takes place, how fast can our enzymes in our body interact with these components, because this can impact the physiological impact of the food system. I think most of you have heard about glycemic index. So for example, this is a parameter that tells you how quickly the sugar from the starch can be released into your blood. But also at the level of proteins and lipids, it's important to control the kinetics of digestion while we are digesting, because it affects the metabolic response. What does it mean? Well, I think most of you, most of us, we are, we are exposed to a lot of food. So there is a tendency of over-consuming food. So it's important to understand to what level we can control this, also based on designing of our food product. So the induction of satiation and satiety. Satiation means when you're eating and you stop eating the meal. For that, you need, in fact, a portion of metabolites that is quickly available to have feedback mechanisms to the brain that you stop eating. Vice versa, you have the development of hunger for the next meal. That's satiety. So, and then you need, of course, metabolites that are slowly released inside your digestion reactors. So we want to play around with that in order to impact those physiological responses. But how can we do that? How can we do that as food scientists, as technologists? Well, we first need to understand how the natural delivery system is looking like. And starting from the pulses, I can introduce you to this way of thinking. Let's say we focus on the starch. The starch is here, the brown circle. In fact, if we want to digest the starch, our digestion enzyme need to be able to find the starch. Well, in the cotyledon, so in the seed, the starch is surrounded by the protein and is surrounded by a cell wall. I can tell you the native starch is very lowly digestible. It's ungelatinized, we call it. Also, the native starch is encapsulated by a plant cell wall that we cannot digest. So I hear you saying, so what am I in fact doing? Well, I can tell you, luckily, we have processing. We have processing because by that, we can impact the physical status of the starch granule, but we can also impact the barrier function of the plant cell wall. Because I can tell you what is happening by processing, for example, just cooking, is that we, for example, impact the pores in the cell wall of these cells, and we create a labyrinth through which the enzymes can find their way. And that way, it retards the starch digestion. But what can we then do with processing? So I told you already, when we cook, that's what we observed. When we cook and we chew, because afterwards we chew the seed, we will obtain this kind of microstructural property. And we will get intact cells still, in which the macronutrients are still entrapped. But we can do also something different. We can also start milling the seed when you make a flour, for example. And what has been observed is that in that way we obtain, an open structure in which we have freely accessible macronutrients. Okay, but then we continued on our way of thinking and we said, okay, it's nice to know, but in fact, what can we do within one processing step? Because when you cook, maybe I cook 30 minutes and you cook 60 minutes, is there any difference that we can do? I mean, we need to cook to, for example, remove the antinutrients to increase the palatability, but can we do something with the intensity of cooking? And that's what we saw in this study, and without going into details, so we cooked the seed, we showed it, so we created a bolus, let's say, and what we saw here with using the same type of processing, just cooking, but just changing the intensity of the treatment, we saw that we could change the starch digestibility. So a lower cooked sample was digesting slower. So playing around with the processing variables within one processing technique is a unique thing that we can work on. But then the next question is, maybe you can have the proof of a bean sample, but not necessarily then this is true for the chickpea or for the pea. Because you need to be aware that, let's say, not necessarily they're coming from the same plant family, but maybe their barriers, so the starch-to-protein ratio is changing, the barrier functions are changing, so maybe not necessarily this is true for all the commodities as part of this one family of raw material. So we investigated that, for example, but what we saw is that by processing, we can push all raw materials in the same direction to have this unique functionality of retarding the digestion kinetics. So just to say that process structure-function relations, the study of that is of really important at the level of different raw materials, and that food structure seems to be a key variable in this story. At the next point, I can tell you that unfortunately we know that pulses are very useful in our diet, but if you see how many we eat them, so all Europeans seem to eat them too little in fact. We don't reach the 50 grams of dry seeds per day that they recommend in dietary recommendations. So what can we do? We can encourage to eat more seeds, so more cooked seeds to all consumers. But what we can also do as food processors, we can try to incorporate ingredients in other products. So that's what we tried. And we thought, can we produce flours and then incorporate it into products? Yeah? But then, I already mentioned if you make a flour, you throw away the gift of nature. So wouldn't that be rather sad? We destroy the structure. So we played around with variables in making this ingredient from a different point of view. And what we did is, in fact, we cooked it first, and then we mechanically disintegrated, and we made a flour afterwards, and we could develop such a cellular ingredients. What we did as part of a next study is that we, in fact, started to make a food system out of this. And what you need to be aware of, if you make a food system, of course, imagine that we wanted to make a pasta in this case, then you need to make sure that, of course, you also develop a product that goes through the techno-functional steps in order to develop this type of product. For example, a pasta, you need to go to a dough step. But producing this dough step was not possible only with this cellular ingredient. What we did, we looked to ratios of this cellular ingredient and this more techno-functional ingredient, and still we could reduce the starch digestion kinetics. So just as an example, that is important to see the potential of processing to produce the ingredient, but also, even if we have the ingredient, we are not eating ingredients, we are not eating flour, we would still incorporate it into a food product. Also, we need to understand the consequence of that. We validated, let's say, these data also in vivo, and that's what we saw here. So we asked consumers to consume a chickpea puree. So it was a chickpea puree here that we produced at the one hand side with an open flour and at the one hand side with a cellular flour. And so we gave it to them as a breakfast meal. And that were the results, in fact, for all the parameters that we evaluated. So we saw that the people that consumed the cellular ingredient, they were less hungry, for example. They had a lower desire to eat. But, for example, they were feeling more full and they were feeling more satiated. So maybe as a last thing, message that I want to bring to you is the awareness of the fact that, in fact, we are living in a society which is rather heterogeneous, including people with different needs. And also that we need to study that. And that I believe that as the food processing industry, we can also play a real role in developing foods for people with specific needs. The one example that I want to go into was about elderly people, and I will be very brief because of the sake of time. You need to be aware of the following, and I will introduce you to the gastric phase, the stomach. I think everybody knows the stomach is acidic. But the moment a food system is arriving in the stomach phase, in fact, its pH will increase because our food is buffering. So it means that we will have a gradual pH change as a function of time while we are digesting in the gastric phase. This is important because the enzymes that are there in our gastric phase, they need particular pH domains in order to become active. So I hope you can see that to the moment our pH is higher, so let's say around higher than than 3, then our salivary amylase can still be active, but the pepsin, the protease which was playing around, cannot work yet. It's important to be aware of this. In a healthy adult, this would be a relevant profile. But we have also a lot of elderly people. For example, in our society, 1/5, I looked up, and the European population is older than 65 years old. We know from a physiological point of view that they have less acid secretion. So they live with a higher gastric pH. We know that they produce lower amounts of enzymes. Often they take also proton pump inhibitors, so they will have really a higher pH. So we need to take that into account in order to develop foods that is adapted to their specific needs. Okay, so as a concluding slide, I want to tell you that, in fact, I told you a story of, let's say, an ingredient over a whole journey of variables, resulting in a large variation of different types of food systems, and that I believe that we are able to also develop foods with a very clear food-health relation, if we start from the understanding of the situation in the raw material, that we are aware of how we can use the processing chain and adapted variables there in order to tailor the nutritional functionality, and that we can also focus on the needs for specific subpopulations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Tara. And I liked your from farm to flush. I might have to steal that one. It was very good. Thank you for that. So last but by no means least, let me pass the floor now to Inge Arends, who is the Managing Director of Flanders Food, the Spearhead Cluster and Innovation Platform for the Flemish agri-food industry. I'll pass you the floor for your presentation.
This is still Tara. Good afternoon, everybody. Still the KU Leuven. So I'm, as Natasha said, the Managing Director of Flanders Food, Spearhead Cluster, and all speakers that were before me, they are also partners in the cluster, because I'm representing the cluster organization, but the cluster is more than that. It's a lot of partners in the cluster. So cluster, we have more than 300 industry members. Around 2/3 of them are real food processors, and 1/3 are like companies that are working in the ecosystem of the food industry, because we are focusing on innovation. So it means you cannot innovate only by just one type of factory or company. You need technology providers, you need the farmers, you need the customers, you need the retail. So all of them are also part of our cluster. We have 10 research groups, so you have seen some of them today. Then also, not everybody needs to be a member to take part of the activities of Flanders Food, so they also can join projects, they can join disseminations activities. So we have more than 800 individual companies each year that are coming to at least 2 activities, and we are coordinating or participating in 70 running projects during a year. In a nutshell, we are strategic driven, so we make together with our partners, with the members and with the research institutes, a strategic agenda on innovation and R&D, always focused on innovation and always focused on collaboration. And we do this for the Flemish food industry to make sure that they remain competitive, because they are competitive, that they remain competitive, and that we will have the best food in the world coming from this area. As a strategy, we have a process-driven strategy in our cluster, because we don't want to tell the members, the companies, what they have to do. So we just want to make sure that they get support in what they want to do. So we have process to make the building blocks of knowledge. So we have to support real R&D, so R&D with the big R, and lead in knowledge. So these are long-term projects. I think the projects that Tara has shown is one of those examples. Pulse flour, what do you have to do with your pulses to make it more digestible? These are things that are started in that area. Then very important as a cluster, because we have a lot of SMEs in Flanders, more than 70% of the members are SMEs, lead to knowledge. It's like all those know-how that is somewhere in the academic heads and libraries. How can we give it away to the SMEs? How can they get access to that information? How can we show them by demonstrations, etc., like in Vegitech, what Imka said? How can we show it to them? And to make sure that all the companies are aware of the good know-how and knowledge. Accelerate effective and efficient innovation is from the moment that a company has the knowledge, he also wants to innovate. He wants to produce products to adapt the processes. And then also, we as a cluster organization find matching with trying to do trials on the pilot plants, but also to link them with commercial players that they really go to investments and implementation. And also in the lead in knowledge, so when you go to the beyond new things, you have to collaborate with other sectors, with the health sector, with technology sector, with the packaging sector, because we are not the packers, but we need the packers if we want to pack our food. So these are the things in the last sector. When we have the teams, also the teams are decided together with the members, so it's not somebody in Flanders Food that is like inventing what do we want to do today. No, we have also this a big process where we interview individual companies, we bring them together again in brainstorms, we match them with the researchers at universities and the knowledge institutes, so that we can build up strategically for 10 years for what are the topics and the concepts we have to tackle, where we do have we do need research, do need innovation to change that food system, because the task that we get from our company members is please help us with innovation and collaboration to tackle societal and economical challenges. So our members are really aware of the fact that they have to change the food system, that they have to change the way they are processing towards a more sustainable food system, sustainable in different ways, sustainable in an economical way, in a decent food production way, but also nutritional, healthy and environmental impact. And these are the programs that we have set up. Resilient and sustainable agri-food system is from, we say from farm to mouth, but today I learned from farm to flush. But the flush is then in the personalized food and healthy diets. And world-class food production is really what is happening in the factory, because it's still today, we want to show that food processing, the process of changing the products to make products that are very easy to consume for consumers. It's very important that we can still do that. That's world-class food production. And New and Shifting Resources is a program focusing on those side streams to make sure that we use every biomass available that is edible. And then the support, as we say, the activities Flanders Food is making the bridge is knowledge dissemination, starting projects, coordinating projects, helping other people to make projects. We make sure that there are pilot facilities and other services, also not alone. We do this also together because everything is collaboration. We have a model that we always need a good research partner, so like a university or ILVO as a research institute that are hosting to make sure that there are not only a lot of inox but also brains available to make sure that there are also projects running on the pilot plants. And of course those cross-sectoral collaborations. And so then some examples, I will give some Flemish examples and a little bit, I don't know if it's by accident because we all made our presentations separately, but I start with one like the fermentation in bread. For a healthy diet. So we have the project Zorfen. It's a typical project in Flanders. It's half of the project is really strategic research. This is executed by the VUB and KU Leuven. And then we have also companies that are doing processing trials and research in their factories. And in this one, we want to see what is the impact of sourdough bread on the human health. And it's really looking how we process the breads and how we make the sourdough to make sure that the breads are always tasty and good to eat, that they have a good shelf life, but that they also have a good impact on human health. And the hypothesis there is that the satiety index it will be different by eating sourdough, so that you don't eat too much, that you eat bread, that you have a good feeling about eating your bread, but that you're not getting obese. The food process, another project, there we have then also the collaboration from IMCA, is the frozen vegetables for health to, and it's also Tara, it's a collaboration that they work together. Veggie chain, and in this one, we have some Flemish, because we are famous in Flanders of some vegetables in the frozen vegetable industry. So leek and Brussels sprouts, we want to follow them from the field, all the processing steps from harvesting over all the steps that are possible that you can do in a factory, but also thinking when you want to prepare the product, when you have a frozen cauliflower or a frozen leek, and you go to a household or to a catering, a lot of precious things and nutritious components that maybe are survived the food processing process because the food processors are taking care of it. It can be that a single consumer just put it in the microwave, put on start, and everything is destroyed. So it's also what is happening then at the household, and how can we know that the people will do that, so how can we change something in the processing in the factories to avoid that the nutrition levels and value of the products are disappearing. And again, everything needs to be of a good taste and texture, because otherwise people will not eat those good vegetables. Another project is food care. It's with other pilot plants, because in our model we always try to make sure that we go from the big R&D to the D of development, and we see that food pilots and pilot plants are very important. And in this one, it's very focusing on that preparing of the meal. And in food care, it's like preparation of meals in hospitals and in nurseries for elder people. But again, there you want to have a nutritious plate, but you want that the people are eating it, that it's not thrown away afterwards. So it has to be healthy, it has to be nice colors, it has to be good texture. And it's there a process when you have something frozen, something reheated, something that's a regeneration process. You have to transport it to the person that is maybe not available to, able to do the processing themselves. How can we make sure that we have a warm, tasty meal with a high nutritional value? And in this project, it's now finished. We have some new methodologies and ideas in how we can help with simple techniques people in those hospitals and nurseries to make, with the same ingredients, with the same products, a better meal. And then these are the Flemish projects, but as Flanders Food, we also want to be a leading cluster in Europe. So we try to, and we do it, we bring together other clusters, because clusters as Flanders Food, you have one in the Walloon area, it's Wagralim, it's our sister cluster, or brother cluster. And we have similar clusters also over in Europe. And the first platform, smart specialization platform we are coordinating is smart sensors for agri-food, because this is going to the digitization. If you want to follow up the quality from farm to fork, you need also systems, blockchain, data analysis to see if it's really true. And for all of that, you need sensors, because if you don't have something that can measure, you don't have data. And this is the one that is already the oldest one, and it's a very nice collaboration with those all those clusters. The second one, because we thought this is a good idea to work together as clusters for all those SMEs in Europe, it's ingredients for circular economy. So this is making ingredients out of the side streams, and it can be with a lot of type of food processing technology. It can from fermentation towards processing, mechanical or others, just to see what are all the possible ways to make better ingredients coming from side streams. And at a certain moment that you don't have side streams anymore, that everything becomes a product, an ingredient. And there, Wagralim is the leading cluster, and we are then the co-lead. The third one is also important for food processors, because you have to pack your products, because you want to keep them tasty and nice and etc. We have those products, and then we have, it's a very fresh one, this is a new smart specialization platform, and there we asked Pack for Food, with also a sister cluster in Flanders that is bringing together the packaging producers and the food producers on that food packaging team. And this is also very important that we can collaborate in Europe. And I think we can have more examples, but time is finished. So if you want to know more, you always can reach me. Thank you. Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I would now like to call all of our speakers back up, please, to the front, and we're going to have a bit more of a panel session. And I would also like to introduce another speaker as well, and that is Rebecca Fernandez. So Rebecca is Director of Food Science, Research and Innovation at Food Drink Europe. So Rebecca, welcome to the panel. So we're going to dig in a little bit now, a bit deeper into the importance, the potential of processing more generally in achieving sustainability goals. But first, I mean, we've heard from all of our speakers here. So Rebecca, I know you haven't quite sat down yet. I'll let you sit. But let me come to you first. I want to hear from you a bit your reflections on what, I can't really see you, where are you? There we go. Your reflections on what we've just heard and maybe situate that within your perspective, any wider thoughts you have to bring there from your perspective from Food Drink Europe.
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here at the panel today. First, I would like to thank also the presenters for the amazing presentations that they have delivered on how much research is going into improving the way we process and to deliver new innovative products as well. So as an industry, we are proud of the processing methods that we have developed to make safe, healthful and enjoyable food available to all consumers. So I'm really amazed of the amount of research that is going on to really improve the processes and products, not only here in Belgium, because we are here in Belgium in the Open Food Conference, but also in all parts of Europe. So yeah, I think my introductory remarks are about how much innovation and how much research is going into doing things in a better way than we do now.
Well, let's dig in now a little bit more into the potential of processing here. And Imke, I want to come to you first, because I was very struck watching your presentations about this valorization of food products and also from the farm level. And of course, right now, that's very topical. All the farmers are talking about incomes, problems with incomes and money. And so I want to dig in a little bit into that, about how you think processing can help maximize the potential of the farmer's income there, and maybe any reflections or thoughts about how you work with farmers and how you can encourage them maybe to look into this side of things.
So for us, it was actually quite new, specifically within the Fair Chain project, to work with the farmers, and I learned a lot actually also from them actually of how they are processing already, because we have actually already a lot of farmers in Belgium, but also in other countries in Europe that are actually doing some small processing, like making, for example, cheese out of milk, etc. So they are doing already quite a lot without any knowledge that we had on that. So that's also important to know that. And of course, we want to improve and also give the knowledge that we have coming from the industry, coming from the Research Institute, also to them. I think it's really important that they are aware of some kind of equipments or processing that could be also of serve for them actually to enlarge the shelf life or to improve their processes and have that type of knowledge as well. So I think it's really important to also get acquainted with the cooperations, the farmer cooperations, and to involve them also already in the beginning of our projects, because we learned a lot in our project during the co-creation workshops and involving those farmers from the beginning actually. We learned of how we could tackle some equipment and to make it more affordable, more accessible also for them, and where are actually the things that are facing, in fact, if, for example, already on how they have to deal with large volumes of product that they have to buy themselves, if we think about packaging material and the impact on that, also on the labeling of the packaging material is quite important for them to know all that knowledge as well. So I think it's good to involve them more and to give them also the knowledge that we have at our research. And you need to know that, of course, we are universities, we publish a lot of scientific papers, but I think it's also important to, via social media or by the television or other media where the farmers are connecting with, that we also take that along in the dissemination approach of what we actually are tackling within certain research projects.
Yeah, connecting those dots there. Yeah, it's a very interesting point. And I want to dig in a little bit now into, so you've talked about maybe the farmer's side. I want to maybe move more to the consumer's side. And throughout your presentations, I think there's a very compelling case that processing is there's a clear link here with health. And so maybe Luke, I come to you first. There is obviously a lot of interest, or a lot of recent interest, into the microbiome and the potential of fermentation there. I'm curious to hear from you how you think we can maybe communicate effectively about that, because it's also quite a complex topic for consumers to understand, and communicate effectively on the fact that processing doesn't necessarily equal unhealthy, because that's also something, you know, we've also, sometimes consumers can think. Your thoughts there?
Yes, that's very sure. Processing is not synonymous with a bad thing. Cereals on the field, we cannot just walk there and eat them. Since thousands of years, we have to process them to make edible products of it. And that is what has been done for thousands of years through fermentation. It's a pity that, because fermentation can contribute to a very short chain, and it's a pity that fermentation, local fermentation, is disappearing. Some farmers indeed produce their own cheeses and yogurts, etc. But it's not only about farmers, also butchers that make their own fermented sausages. I don't know them anymore. Bakers who still, well, first of all, bakers are disappearing. Every year we have less artisan bakers, but bakers that produce their own sourdoughs, which is also a fermented food product, which can contribute to much tastier and breads and other baked products where most probably there is also a link with consumer health. Of course, when you do all these fermentations on your own, and in the COVID time, many people have started fermentation themselves at home, but that can also be a danger. As you just said, we have to have more education about that. What it exactly is. And there was some television program where it was announced to use your vegetable waste, etc., for fermentation at home. Well, I wouldn't dare to say that, because you do not know how your process at home will evolve. And the message I always give is just buy pH strips at the pharmacist and check if the pH is low enough in order to have a safe product. But fermentation for sure is a very old processing technique which can still have a lot of advantages in the future.
And Tara, let me come to you also on the same point, similar point, about this this need to effectively communicate, you know, the fact that processing doesn't necessarily equal unhealthy. But I also want to dig in a little bit into some of the points that you raised about, you know, increasing the intake of pulses, for example. You had some ideas there. Maybe if there's any more ideas you have to bring to the table in terms of maximizing that potential. And also I found it very interesting, we didn't quite have the time, but at the end, the targeted groups, you spoke about the elderly. I think that's a very, very interesting point. I mean, how do you think we can specifically target information to the elderly, that obviously when it comes to health, a huge, huge target group? Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So maybe your first question about, let's say, bringing more pulses on the plate. So yeah, we can. What we know is that consumers like to eat variation, of course, and so it is nice if we can incorporate the same raw material, the same delivery system in different types of food products. So, for example, that you can eat a pulse in different ways. You can eat that as a seed, for example. The next day you can eat it as a source of pasta, for example. Then maybe it's partially incorporated in a bread system. And I mean, in that way, you can have it in more different variations on the plate. But then, it means that you need to go developing a particular ingredient that then needs to be incorporated in a food system again. A lot of pulses also, a pea protein is, for example, also a lot used now in dairy alternatives, for example. But then we need to understand, of course, how this ingredient behaves in this new food system. And then, food structure will always come into play in the relation to the digestion properties. Then linked to your second question, so on the particularly, let's say distinct populations, elderly is one, but for example, we also know that the physiology of young people is different than a healthy adult. There's also the awareness that even women have different physiology than men. I mean, so all of these things gets more documented, also from the medical area, so this is nice. We can use this also at the level of food digestion studies, but towards elderly and towards specific populations, I still think that we have the trend in at least also our society that we want to have convenience food. So I also think that food industry can also play a role there in developing well-characterized systems which are better than, let's say, the average food systems that are being developed for the healthy adult, let's say. Food industry can control very well their variables, their conditions, so then we can spend the effort on characterizing them very well at the level of functionality, and we can, for example, then go towards a particular label, which then can prove that there is a different functionality.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point about the different groups. Inga, let me come to you now. Hiding somewhere along the line. I mean, it's clear that processing has this enormous potential in terms of achieving sustainability goals for we've heard of various things: food waste, health, from the farm level, economically. But there tends to be much less focusing on processing. I mean, I work a lot in agri-food, agri-food chain and in agri-food policy. We often talk a lot more about sustainability in terms of agriculture and then the other side of consumers. Maybe your thoughts on how we can bring more focus into this, into policy discussions, and more focus specifically on processing.
Well, in policy discussions, we have a pity that we don't have the big tractors as the farmers to come on the street and to show that we are there. But it's just by bringing the food to the people. I think the food processing industry is also a little bit, maybe our companies are a little bit shy, and they don't like those things to say that they are important, because the earliest food processors were the men and women that make the food at home, and then it's just becoming more and more like a lot of food producing. Then you need a little machine, and then you buy a bigger one, and at a certain moment you have a processing factory. So on the one hand, making food is very old. It's also very ethically, because a lot of people have a lot of sentiments with that. And of course you need the farmers. If the farmer will not have a good product at the farmer's side, you never can work in a decent way in your food processing factory. So it has to go hand in hand. That's why we say it's the resilient agri-food system that we need, and a sustainable way of thinking. In our programs, we also have that link to the consumer, to the retailer, to think about how can we co-create with consumers that they already have in a very early stage, that they can say something about what they expect. So if you have those strange vegetables that Imka showed on the picture, if you give that to consumers and you say to them, they are okay, why don't you buy them? Why don't you eat them? What do we have to do with them before you want to eat them? So it's really finding ways that we go in a direct co-creation with the consumer. Not only the consumer as a subject, like asking them, do you like it? Do you like the color? Do you like the taste? Not really in a very early stage of the product development, of the process development, to involve them. And from the moment that people are involved, I believe that they will be a kind of partner and participate also in the food processing process. And it will be the same with the farmers. If the farmers is not just the one delivering at the door of the food factory, but that they are really going in a co-creation process with the food factories, they also become partners each from each other. And in the type of projects we are setting up, that collaboration is very important. And we try in every project to bring different types of people, different types of sectors together, to say it's together that we have to make the transition of the food system. Not only the farmers, not only the food processors, not only the consumers, not only retail, not only policy, it's really everybody together.
Okay, thank you. And maybe you can think about borrowing some tractors. Rebecca, let me come to you now with a bit of a big question to end before I throw out to the audience for their questions. So I want to dig in a bit more to processing and nutrition with you. Now, there is this idea, this concept that I've heard bandied around a lot more and increasingly hearing in Brussels, which is ultra-processed foods. They're very poorly understood. I want to dig in a little bit with you about the definition of what it is and what it isn't, and also trying to tackle maybe the misunderstanding about that, and trying to, again, coming back to this idea of, that processing is not necessarily unequal. Can you try and untangle a little bit for us this idea of ultra-processed versus, what we've been discussing here today?
How much time do we have left?
You have a few minutes.
Okay. No, I think we will need a whole session, I think, to discuss just this topic. I think in our case as an industry, our main concern is that we see that consumers are increasingly confused and misled by this term, about what it is, about how to recognize it, and also because it claims that, as you mentioned, all processing it has a bad effect on your health. And it's not only us as industry, but also researchers and expert governments saying that. So we see more and more debate opening up about how much value this definition has, and we are increasingly hearing that some expert recommendations that is not adding any news or any new value to the existing dietary recommendations. So I think that is what I can say, and I think we have seen also in this presentation that processing can bring a lot of good things to improve resource management, to improve the quality of the products that we're delivering to the consumers. I'm passing the ball now back to my fellow panelists.
Okay, well, actually, I think I need to open the floor to questions, unless someone wants to come desperately in on this point. Tara, you'd like to come in here?
Maybe, because let's say there was just, let's say a recent study out on this, an epidemiological study, a big one. And so they found a relation on how they interpreted, let's say, between weight gain and obesity risk and cardiovascular diseases, and what they then called ultra-processed food. But when we look as food scientists and technologists to these foods, these are products rich in sugar, rich in fat, rich in salt. And based on food formulation, we already know for decades that can never be healthy foods. So I think that needs to be the message. Healthy food is not a food that equals high sugar, high fat, or salt, or combinations of those.
So more about the components than the actual processing or the level of processing.
Yeah.
Okay, we could dig in a lot more onto this, but unfortunately the clock is ticking, and I do want to open up to the floor for questions. So does anybody in the audience have any questions for our panelists about anything that we have heard so far? Yes. If you could just introduce yourself and say who your questions to, and try and keep it nice and concise if possible.
Okay, my name is Manfred Ruzatz. I'm the Executive Director of Nutrition Plus Health Care. So I'm more focusing on nutrition and health, also from a connecting advocacy, regulatory, and empathy, so for consumers and patients. As it looked, you clearly stayed away from ultra-processed foods, what you have presented, so it looks very healthy, and it's still a question of communication, of course, to present it as such. Did you also steer clear from the novel food definition from what the novel food regulation from 2015 has been proposing? So are you confident that none of your processes would be considered by the European Commission as novel food?
So, for example, you're referring to technologies as hydrostatic processed foods or post-electric fields?
No, I'm referring to what, as it looked, you have been using processes that have been already before 1997.
Yes.
That is the original definition of novel foods by.
Indeed.
So would you recommend as well, and maybe as well when you are representing this,
we from Flanders Food, we also give seminars on novel food to SMEs and to big companies, but big companies mostly are aware already, just to say that it's not a problem if you have a novel food or a novel processing. There is a good legislation. So in the legislation, you have a system that if you invent a new ingredient or a new process, and you follow all the steps of the legislation, you make sure that you have a toxic report, that you do a lot of studies on what you're doing, that you can have a safe label. And from that moment on, the ingredient is safe. And I think we really have a good system in Europe. It's a very severe one. So from the moment that they are saying, and with their scientists, and in a very neutral and objective way, with a lot of data that has to be collected, because it's not so easy to build a story and to build a file on that novel food or novel processing, that it's okay, that's safe. So we are, because we want companies are doing innovation, doing research, trying to do new things, not only the old-fashioned processes. So we help companies to find a way to make a good report, to do that on an economic level, to do it together, because it's always collaboration at Flanders Food, to make sure that we can use new technology and that we can be a high-tech sector in bringing nutritious products on the market. And if you then say ultra-processed foods, for me, if it's non-processed or ultra-processed, it doesn't care. It's what Tara said. It's the nutritional value. What is the sugar? Even sugar is not bad. Eh? You need sugar, you need fat. Otherwise, you will. My thesis was on stunted growth in Thailand. Children that didn't have fat and sugar and proteins. So you need it. So it's not. It's just a nutritional value balanced with your lifestyle, with what you need, your age, if you're a sport guy or you're sitting the whole day. So it's really looking for that. And if ultra-processed foods make a little bar that little children that doesn't like to eat nutritious food, that doesn't like to eat vegetables, or having the vitamins and the nutrients of the vegetables in that bar, just eating it like a cookie, then ultra-processed foods is very good, that we are able to do that. So it's not ultra-processed foods, it's that nutritional value, and it's the nutritional value balanced with your personal lifestyle. It's not even what is good for you is not good for me. It's really looking to that balance.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to probably, if you don't mind,
just quickly, if
yeah,
possible.
very quickly, if you don't mind, Rebecca, to quote you. I mean, I think for this we would need weeks to probably, or a lot of time to discuss that. I agree with some parts what you said, but I would have plenty of counter arguments of what you said. So I stop here.
Yeah. Maybe for the coffee break then.
Just a quote. I wanted to quote you.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of time.
Thank you very much. If I could just ask you to turn the microphone off, because we can only have a certain amount. There we go. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Might have time for one, maybe two. No questions? No one jumping in? Don't be shy. It's your moment. Nothing? Okay, well, if there are no more questions, we are a little bit over time. I wanted to do a really quick round if you had any messages for policymakers going ahead into the next. Obviously, it's a very key moment. We're talking in the EU elections, mandate changing. Perhaps if we go a tiny weeny bit over time, a couple more minutes, would you like to do a quick round, your main message, but making it as crystallized as possible? And I'll start on my end with Tara and move through to the next.
So yeah, my message would be that, let's say, also by processing we can impact food structure, and that is an important variable in the documentation of food digestion properties.
Very crystalline.
For me, it would be, we are always talking about farm to fork, and now from farm to flush. And sometimes we are only looking at the beginning of that chain and at the end of the chain. So I think the whole chain approach, and also investing in good research, especially also on novel food, for example. I think it's really necessary to take along also food processing in research and invest into that, so that we have clear answers and that we can demonstrate that everything is okay.
We still need to explore a lot of spontaneous fermented foods, and by unraveling those processes and by understanding them, we can use these learnings to introduce this processing to develop new foods in the future as well.
I understood that in the next frameworks of the European Commission, that for the R&D budgets, they are thinking of having 1/3 of the budget to security, and they mean homeland security. I understand this because of the geological situations we are in, but I would ask them to put food security on the same level as security. It's security, and not only the agriculture part, but also the food processing part, because by securing your products that the farmers have made with your food processing, you also have the security of food in Europe, and to ask to have more research budgets foreseen in the next calls for food processing, because it's very difficult to find the word food processing in call text of the European Commission.
Yeah, and a bit to sum up everything I'm hearing also from our side, it will be to recognize the role of food processing and innovation in food processing to contribute to sustainable food systems, so to make food a priority in the next political term.
Excellent, very clear messages. Thank you very much. Well, that brings our panel session to a close. So thank you very much to our speakers, to all of you in the audience, and I believe we're having a short coffee break now. So everyone enjoy your coffee break. Thank you very much.